Right then, Hollywood loves selling you the story of the great biblical epic. Grand, all piety and reverence, shimmering robes and divine light. The real story is how one fella tried to buy his way into heaven with a budget that would make the Pope blush, and ended up in production purgatory.
I'm over it. I don't need this anymore.
And I'll tell you about the absolute hames they made of the book of Genesis. This was 1966. The old studio system was on its last legs, bleeding money from self-inflicted wounds like Cleopatra. The Hollywood giants were dinosaurs, smelling the tar pit and looking for one last massive meal. But this story, this particular yoke, doesn't even start in Hollywood.
Alright then.
It starts with an Italian, a producer named Dino De Laurentiis. Now Dino was a force of nature, a showman with a head so full of notions he must have been dizzy. He'd already made War and Peace. He'd made Barabbas. But that wasn't big enough. No. He decided, in his infinite wisdom, that he was going to film the Bible. Not just a story from it, the whole yoke from the start. His ambition was, well, ambition is too small a word. It was arrogance.
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
A beautiful, towering Italian arrogance. The plan, on paper, you couldn't fault it. This wasn't just going to be a movie, it was going to be an event. The greatest story ever told, as he called it, conveniently forgetting it had been told quite a bit. He wasn't just going to make a film, he was going to make the definitive film. The one that would make Cecil B. DeMille look like a fella making home movies in his back garden. De Laurentiis announced it would be the first of a series covering the entire Old and New Testaments. This first one was just in the beginning. And to make this masterpiece, he had a brilliant notion. He'd hire the greatest directors on earth.
I don't know who you are.
Not one, but a whole team of them. The plan was to get Luchino Visconti, the great Italian maestro, to direct one part, and Robert Bresson, the austere French genius, to direct another. Orson Welles, the ball genius himself, was supposed to do a segment. Imagine that! It would be the ultimate art film, the ultimate blockbuster, a cinematic feast. And to fund this grand design, he strong-armed 20th Century Fox, the studio still mopping up the red ink from Liz Taylor's Carry On in Egypt, to distribute it. He secured a budget that was, frankly, obscene. $18 million. $18 million in 1966 money. You could have bought a small, heavily armed nation for that.
Let me explain.
It was a budget big enough to choke a donkey, and then buy the donkey's entire family a string of new stables. This was it. The last gamble. The old studio way. When in doubt, spend so much money that the sheer weight of it has to produce a masterpiece. A perfect recipe for success. That's right, a grand start. A grand start. What's the first thing that happens? Every single one of those genius directors told Dino to get lost. Visconti read the script, and I imagine laughed him out of the room. Bresson, who was practically a monk, was horrified by the vulgarity and the sheer amount of money. He wouldn't touch it. Orson Welles, well, he was Orson Welles. He was probably off finding money for his own mad project and didn't have time for someone else's. So, the greatest director's plan? Gone. Dead before the first camel was even auditioned. De Laurentiis was left holding this $18 million yoke with no one to steer it. So, in a move of pure, beautiful desperation, he turned to one man, John Huston. Now, John Huston was a legend, no doubt about it. The Maltese Falcon, the treasure of the Sierra Madre, the African Queen. But he was also a the ball, a professional rogue, a man who loved drinking, gambling, and chaos more than he loved just about anything else. He was the definition of pure devilment. He was everything those artsy European directors weren't. He was a brawler, and he was available. They had already hired him, you see.
I see.
The original modest plan was for Huston to just direct the Noah's Ark segment. It suited him. An old, grizzled man talking to animals. But with everyone else gone, De Laurentiis and the panicked Fox executives looked at Huston and said, "Right, you'll do." You're directing the whole bloody thing. And Huston, in what might be the greatest act of notions in film history, didn't just agree, he had conditions. He looked at the script, looked at the budget, and said, "Fine, I'll direct your massive sacrilegious cash grab, but I'm also playing Noah. And while we're at it, I'll be the voice of God. Stop the lights, you cannot make this up. The man cast himself as the Almighty. The arrogance is just breathtaking. It's beautiful. So now the picture is being directed by God, who's also one of the main actors. What could possibly go wrong?" With God/John Huston at the helm, it was time to fill the earth with stars. Big ones. This was the 60s, and you couldn't have an epic without a cast that buckled the poster, so they started making calls. For Abraham, the father of nations, they got George C. Scott. Now, Scott was one of the greatest actors of his generation. He was also a notorious head the ball, a drinker, and a man possessed of a volcanic temper who thought most of Hollywood was beneath him. He arrived on set, looked at the desert, looked at his robes, and immediately started acting the maggots. He thought the whole thing was nonsense, a pageant, he called it. He and Huston, two bulls in a very small, very hot china shop, went at it from day one. Scott would argue about Abraham's motivation. Huston, who was, again, God, would tell him to just hit his mark. It was a war of egos that could have funded its own small war. But Scott was just the appetizer. For Sarah, Abraham's long-suffering wife, they cast Ava Gardner, the studio system in high heels. By 1966, her greatest days were behind her, but nobody had told her that. She was a diva from the old school, and she despised John Huston. They had a feud that went back years. She'd worked for him before, and it was a battle. This was just a fresh new hell. She was being asked to play an old, barren woman wandering the desert in a tent. She, who had been the most beautiful woman in the world, she was not happy. She hated the script, she hated the dust, she hated the robes, she hated George C. Scott, who she said was just terrifying. And she saved a special, burning hatred for Huston. She would arrive on set, late, wrapped in mink, and refuse to come out of her air-conditioned trailer until John, personally, came and begged her. She'd hold up the entire shoot, costing tens of thousands of dollars a day just to make God sweat. Pure, uncut devilment. It was an absolute circus, and the hits kept coming. For the three angels who visit Abraham, they got Peter O'Toole. Fresh from Lawrence of Arabia, so he knew his way around a desert. But he was also, let's be kind, a waywit de fairies for most of the decade. A legendary drinker. They cast him as three angels, appearing to Abraham as a shimmering divine presence. O'Toole, bless him, spent most of the shoot either drunk or recovering, wandering the dunes in his angel robes, probably having a great time. Then they got Richard Harris, another famous head the ball, to play Cain, and Stephen Boyd as the tyrant Nimrod. The set was less a film production and more a very, very expensive holding pen for the most magnificent, difficult drunks in show business. The only sane ones, it seemed, were the two unknowns they hired to play Adam and Eve, a young fella named Michael Parks and a Swedish beauty, Ola Bergrid. They had the unfortunate job of being the first sinners, which meant they had to spend most of their screen time wearing nothing but a strategically placed fig leaf, all while these acting giants were roaring and throwing tantrums all around them. It's a miracle they didn't just run screaming into the desert. But the people, as much of a carry-on as they weren't the real problem. The real problem was the scale.
You know what I think the problem is?
This wasn't a film, it was an invasion. Dino and Huston weren't just making a movie, they were trying to recreate Genesis, practically. Let's start with the Garden of Eden. You can't just find the Garden of Eden, not even in the nicer parts of Italy, so De Laurentiis, the Mad Gombin, decided to build it. He built a massive, climate-controlled dome, a huge greenhouse, and he flew in everything. Exotic plants from the tropics, rare flowers, hundreds of birds, butterflies, snakes, lizards. It was supposed to be paradise. It was, for about a day. The first day of shooting, they turn on the massive studio lights needed to film. The heat from those lights trapped inside the dome just cooked everything. The flowers wilted. The plants turned brown. The expensive, exotic birds just fell out of the sky, dead. The butterflies, fried. It was a massacre, an absolute hames. They'd spent a fortune to build a botanical graveyard. They had to scrap the whole thing, clear out the dead animals, and try to shoot it in a real field. A grand start. And then, the Tower of Babel. The story of mankind's arrogance, built by, well, mankind's arrogance. De Laurentiis naturally built it. A massive 5-story practical set in the middle of the desert. A huge, towering thing, cost a fortune, looked incredible, and the script called for God to, smite it.
I know.
Destroy it. But Huston, the director, looks at this $1 million set and decides, well, it's not dramatic enough. The destruction needs to be bigger. So, without telling Dino, he has his special effects crew rig the entire tower with dynamite. Not just the breakaway parts, the whole yoke. And on the day, he rolls the cameras, and he blows the entire set to smithereens. Just obliterates it. Gone. $1 million up in smoke in one take. De Laurentiis, who was watching from a distance, nearly had a heart attack. He came storming over, screaming in Italian, and Huston just shrugged, looked at the pile of smouldering rubble, and said, "Looked good though, didn't it?" But the jewel in the crown, the absolute centerpiece of the entire mad enterprise, Noah's Ark. This was Huston's baby. He was directing it, he was starring in it. And De Laurentiis, the madman, was not going to use miniatures, he was not going to use trick photography. Oh no, he was going to do it for real. He built an ark. A full-scale, massive, biblical-sized ark. And then, he had to fill it. 2 of every animal. So Dino De Laurentiis, in a move that proves he was a gombeen of the highest order, went and bought a German circus. The entire inventory. Elephants, giraffes, lions, tigers, bears, camels, hippos, snakes, hundreds and hundreds of animals. He had them all shipped to the set in Italy. It was an absolute circus. Literally. The set, 4 months, was a living nightmare. You had hundreds of extras, a massive crew, and now, a zoo. A very angry, very confused zoo. The lions, naturally, tried to eat the lambs. The elephants went on a rampage and knocked over a camera crane, nearly killing the cameraman. The monkeys got loose and stole the scripts. The hippos, well, you can imagine the smell. The sheer logistics of it, they were spending more on feed for the giraffes than they were on the supporting actors. It was costing a fortune just to keep the animals from eating each other, never mind filming them. And right in the middle of it all, there's John Huston, dressed in a ratty robe with a massive beard, trying to direct this chaos. He's in it. He's Noah. He's trying to give a very serious, very pious speech about the floods, and you can see, right over his shoulder, 2 baboons just, well, There's a famous story. Huston is in the middle of a big emotional scene. He's talking to God, which is him talking to himself.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
But let's not go down that road. He's given it his all. And a pelican, one of the many, many birds flying around the set, decides to relieve itself. Right on John Huston's shoulder, a big, white blessing. The entire crew just freezes. This is John Huston, the director, the star, God. And he's just been anointed. Huston doesn't even blink. He just slowly looks up at the sky, wipes the mess off his robe, and he growls, "Right. If that's what God thinks of the performance, we'd better do it again." All the while back in Hollywood, the executives at 20th Century Fox were watching the budgets come in. And they were weeping. They were having flashbacks to Cleopatra. They had thought that was a nightmare. This was a biblical plague. The money was just vanishing, gushing out. 18 million was the starting price. Every day a new telegram would arrive from Italy. Need more money? The lions ate the sound man's boots. Need more money? Ava Gardner demands her. Trailer be repainted. Need more money? Huston blew up the Tower of Babel. Again. It was a war against common sense. A logistical nightmare orchestrated by a madman, starring a collection of divas and head the balls, and funded by a studio that was already halfway into the grave. This was the great, arrogant, dying gasp of the old studio system, the belief that no problem was so big it couldn't be buried under a mountain of money. So, in the end, after all the chaos, all the dead butterflies and angry elephants, the film finally gets finished. It comes out in 1966, 3 hours long. And guess what? It was the biggest hit of the year, an absolute blockbuster.
Really?
It made a mountain of money, so it was a success? A triumph? Don't you believe it for a second? Yes, it was the #1 film of 1966. It made $25 million in the US, but it cost 18 million, and that's just the production budget. That's not the marketing. That's not the cost of making thousands of prints. That's not the theatre's cut. That's not the interest on the loans. And it's not the bills for all the giraffe food and Ava Gardner's trailer repainting. By the time all the accounts were settled, they basically broke even. They'd spent 2 years, $18 million, and endured a production disaster that would have broken lesser men, all to not lose money. It was a victory, sure. But the kind of victory that leaves you bloody, broke, and wondering why you started the fight in the first place. It was meant to be the start of a great franchise. In the beginning. Remember? Well, they never made the next bit. They never got to Exodus. They never got to David and Goliath.
Why?
Why? Because they learned the hard, expensive way that you can't just throw an ocean of money at the Bible and expect a miracle. The audience came, sure, but they weren't thrilled. The film was long. It was serious. It was frankly a bit of a slog. It was a monument, but who wants to sit and stare at a monument for 3 hours? Was it just bad luck? Not a bit of it. This film wasn't a holy tribute. It was a monument to pure Egyptry. It was the last dying roar of the studio dinosaur. The absolute arrogant belief that bigger means better, that epic just means expensive. The whole rotten empire of the old studios was coming crashing down. And the Bible wasn't the thing that saved it. It was just another glorious multi-million-dollar tombstone in the graveyard. As me old fella used to say, a nod is as good as a wink to a blind horse. And the studios, God love 'em, they were blind as bats. And that's the dirt from the cutting room floor. Right, I'm off. Sloncha.